I'm an arborist. I want to point out some trees while we go. Anyone know this one?
Hackberry.
Yes, sir. Perfect. Eastern hackberry. Hackberries are limestone plants. Okay, they grow in base-rich environments. It doesn't have to be alkaline soil necessarily. It can be acidic, but it has to have a large saturation of calcium and/or magnesium in the soil. So, Glenshaw Formation, great for that. You can find hackberries all along the Ohio River. You can find hackberries on top of the hills where there's base-rich geology. Okay, so we have some calcium-rich shales, some calcium-rich claystone, and some limestone, and even limey sandstone. I'm going to show you a block down here. It's called the Ames Limestone. It's a crinoidal sandstone. Pretty neat crinoid, little fossil curly critter. Right here we have a Quercus borealis. Nope, that's a Nigra, or sorry, a Velutina, a black oak growing, right, dry soil plant. He built this incredible amphitheater around it. In the amphitheater, we have installed, there's some woodland stone crop in there. You can see some white flowers on the edge, right? That's an indigenous sedum. Lots of people have sedums in their garden. This is a wonderful one. That is the easiest to propagate plant there is. You take a piece, you put it in the ground, and it grows. There is one lone Canada Columbine. If you look there, there is just one little hummingbird pollinated columbine right there with a small yellow and red flower. That is the only columbine indigenous to the this part of the U.S. Okay, in the Southwest and the Rocky Mountains, they explode in diversity. In the East, we mostly have one species. But then again, we only have one species of hummingbird, and out west they have about 30, right? So that's a kind of neat plant. It's the only one there. This amphitheater's incredible. We should host more outdoor education. We should promote that because you can't beat that. Eastern columbine, it's Aquilegia canadensis, so it would be Canada columbine, which is not a very nice sounding euphonic word, but or name. And we also have some Christmas fern in there, and that's the evergreen fern you see. What's another great one? Anyone know this tree? Plant, bush. All right, so if you have cool, moist sites, this is a plant everyone should grow. Okay, between 20 and 40 birds feed on the fruit of this plant, and sort of mid to late summer, this is one that migratory birds are eating before they migrate. Okay, this is a kind of a dogwood. It's called an alternate leaf dogwood. Most dogwoods have opposite leaves. So this one has alternate leaves. In the east, there's only one alternate leaved dogwood, and that's why we call it that. In southeast or just eastern Asia, there are several other alternate leaf dogwoods. They also get the name pagoda tree because of the tiered effect of their canopies. But anyway, this with a common name, you get some confusion on what's what, but this is the American pagoda tree or the alternate leaf dogwood. Low flat flowers like that, incredible for small winged pollinators. Critters with small faces are able to go in there and get nectar. They're able to get pollen. There's multiple lepidopterans that feed on the leaves of this kind of dogwood. This is a bonanza for wildlife. And it's an indigenous plant found in cool, moist areas. It gets a notable disease on it, and if we walk over to it, I might be able to find some. It's kind of fun. It's not fun for the tree, but right here is the biggest liability with this tree. It's called golden canker, and this ailment makes the plant erupt in golden pustules, and so it turns its purple twigs bright gold as they die. If the plant is healthy, it'll survive that. If the plant is severely heat stressed, you'll see a lot of branches succumb to it, but kind of neat. Low flowers. When this is just past bloom, if you smell them, they smell like wheat farina, cream of wheat. That attracts a very specific group of small bees and beetles. So you'll see a bunch of, this is called a flower syndrome, low, flat, wide flowers that smell like cream of wheat. And many plants have adopted this for their pollination strategy. This is a fine example of one. Thank you. Need some water. So we have, we mentioned over here the Magnolia tripetala, umbrella magnolia. We have another magnolia found over here. This one is Magnolia cuminata, cucumber magnolia, so named because the young fruits somehow resemble cucumbers to someone. Maybe smell like it. It doesn't smell like it to me. Cucumber magnolias can be very large. There's a 100-foot tall cucumber magnolia in Leetsdale that is one of the biggest in the area. There's some truly monstrous ones around Philadelphia that are the state champions, that are up over 100 feet and more than 8 foot in diameter trunks. Just very big trees. So yeah, this one gets to be very large. Magnolia tripetala, that might be 50 feet tall eventually. So something to think about. Okay, so we are in a rich woodland ravine. We have base-rich soils, which means we have a lot of elm trees. This elm tree is called a red elm. Okay, we have two kinds of elms common to this area, right? A red elm and a white elm. The Latin for this is Ulmus rubra, or rubrum. Red elm. It's, if you look up at the tree, you will see that it is largely defoliated in spots. You will see it has gaps in its leaves. That is because birds ate the expanding buds for the leaves. It's an incredible plant for wildlife. This time of year, elms look a little sparse. And then there is a disease called Dutch elm disease that can kill elms. American red elms were considered more resistant to it than the American white elm, but they both get it. They can both die. But this one's alive and well so far. This is an American beech. It's a beautiful tree, perfect spot for it. They can be very large. At least one person in this crowd has one on his property. This tree is planted. Sadly, it's not a descendant of the one over there, but it's a great plant. As we walked it back down through the park, we have a hackberry. Note the textured bark. Great plant for kids to play around. Adds interest. There are 2 butterflies that only feed on hackberries. Okay, if you want to increase diversity of animals, you increase the diversity of plant, right? And so we have the 2 hackberry butterflies, emperor butterflies, that only feed on that. There is, in this park that I have found, there are 2 sugar maples. They're both right here in their seedlings. Okay, so the East is characterized by 50 to 60 species of tree, okay? And we have 20 of them that are fairly common, and then the other 30 are fairly specialized in where they occur. Most are specialized to some degree. What the eastern deciduous forest is known for is the floristic diversity of the herbaceous layer, okay? So we're talking perennial plants, things that don't have woody structures. So we're right here. I'll point out somewhat nondescript plant. Okay, this is called Anise Root, or long-styled Sicily, or smooth Sicily. It's related to parsley. There's a charismatic butterfly called the black swallowtail, whose larvae only eat plants in this family, the parsley family. So you might have those on your fennel plants if you grow fennel, or your parsley if you grow parsley. But this is an indigenous plant it would be feeding upon. People may have used this for as an herb to eat, and also as a medicinal herb. I'm not getting into that because, you know, users beware. However, it's a nice plant. Should you smell its crushed foliage, it smells like anise. This park, as we look around, it looks rich and green, okay? as we're on our tour, there's this beautiful Star of Bethlehem. Yes, sir. Perfect. Ornithogalum. There's 2 ornithogalums that were introduced in the bulb trade to make life prettier. This is one of them. I'm sorry, there are many that have been introduced, but 2 got loose, and this is one that got loose. And so most alluvial areas, riparian areas in western Pennsylvania are full of this plant. I will say this plant has some chemistry you really shouldn't eat. It's related to colchicine. When cells divide, it messes that up. It causes major problems. So it's perfectly deer resistant, but there are insects that can be poisoned by trace colchicine in the nectar of this plant. So it's attractive, but it doesn't bring ecologic function, which is a challenge. Much of this area is invaded by another old world plant called gill over the ground or ground ivy. It's okay for generalist bumblebees. Some people love the smell, some people hate the smell of the plant, but it is competing with a lot of more ecologically functional plants that could be there. But there it is, just so you know. Gill over the ground. Big heart-shaped leaves. Everyone knows this plant. You've smelled it since childhood. And yeah, blue. I'm color deaf, so I don't know what color they are. Blue, purple, somewhere in there. There should be some flowers in there, and you will see mostly generalist organisms going to them. I'm going to say generalist and specialist because there are bees that can only exist with specific flowers. Their babies can only eat the pollen and nectar from specific flowers. If you want to save the bees, you have to plant for the specialists. Generalists have detoxification mechanisms to handle all sorts of things. The specialists either can only eat certain things because everything else is poisonous, or they're so specialized in detoxifying one thing, they can't detoxify other things, okay? So you will hear me say this is a great plant for somebody or so forth. Generalists, a lot of bumblebees are generalists. A lot of the bees that no one knows about, we have 400 and some species of bee found in western Pennsylvania, and most people know of a class called a bumblebee and another one called a honeybee. As a reminder to everyone, talking about American honeybees and the population decreasing would be like talking about the population of wild goats decreasing. Okay, these are farm animals that got loose. It's not that they're not important, but the other 400 and some bees matter too, and we don't talk about them. So I hope to bring a little bit of that up as we go on. So this is a white elm, an American white elm right here. The bark texture is a little bit different from the other one. The leaves are a little bit different. There's a sassafras growing low and moist in here. Very sparse in the canopy. Sassafras like a lot of light. The fact that that tree grew up in this area tells you that this spot was once much more open. Okay. This is a charismatic plant of the Appalachians. Yeah, this is a striped maple. Okay, so this plant, if you're in the Allegheny Highlands, should you be in anywhere around Somerset or anywhere on Laurel Hill, you'll start to see them too. This is a plant of mountains. This plant is doing really well here, and we're not in a mountain. We're 1,000+ foot lower than the elevation they're typically found at because we're in a ravine. It's able to do well. If you would put this plant in the south side of your sunny front yard, this plant would die rapidly, okay? We're in an area, it's a ravine, cold air sinks and flows down. And so it cools the ravine off, which is why it's a great spot for a park. Come here in the summertime. It's August. It's 10 degrees cooler here than it is up there. We have another early colonizer. Right behind the camera right now is one up close. These are black cherries, right? The Allegheny Plateau is best known for black cherries, especially north of here. our black cherries grow into big, tall things that the wood is very valuable. You head north, Forest County, black cherries there. It's a major lumber product, but our black cherries grow very nice and straight and tall-ish. This one's leaning for light. They're early successional plants. They germinate as a little seedling, and if they don't have light, the seedling succumbs to lack of light. And so when you see black cherries in abundance, it means that an area was open ground previously. So it's a disturbance indicator traditionally. We have a black locust right here. It's had some spectacular limb tear out. The limbs are on the ground. They like a lot of sunlight. You see low limbs on the tree. You know that this area was open. Those limbs were able to be sustained. The forest has since grown up around it. The tree is shaded. The limbs stopped growing. They were no longer able to feed the roots. Everything shut down and they're peeling off. Yesterday there was a pileated or pileated, however you want to say it, woodpecker right here pecking around looking for ants or whatever it was doing. Sadly, it didn't hang around for the tour. We have another sassafras tree, indicative of open conditions. They often will sprout from the roots of mama tree, and so you'll have lots of little clones of the plant growing, but they have cute mitten leaves. The roots were used to make root beer. It's not as popular now because there's some chemistry in there that in the 60s they thought was problematic for people to consume. So there it is, but nice fragrant smell. And the roots smell like root beer. We have a couple of large black oaks in this park. We're standing right here in between two of them. This one is 150 years old plus. It's probably the oldest tree in the park. We have bigger trees, but for the entire existence of Osborne Elementary School, that tree has been beleaguered with challenges. It's had large branches cut off of it to create function up there. We'll get up to it and look at it, but it is our largest oak tree in the park. We installed a number of eastern hemlock trees in this park. The eastern hemlock is a very typical tree of wooded ravines, low alluvial ground, or else east or north facing cliffs. Okay, they like even moisture, so either deep soil or very shallow soil that has water running directly underneath it and dripping off on a cliff. So the eastern hemlock, about 5,000 years ago, per studies of pollen found in lake bed sediment, the eastern hemlock had been very common, and somewhere between 8,000 and 5,000 years ago became incredibly rare in the area. And some 4,000 years ago, the population came back. And so it is the state tree of Pennsylvania. It's associated, it is one of the most shade tolerant of plants. The shade it casts, virtually nothing can grow under it. And the chemistry of the plant makes it so that the soil is, the upper horizon of soil is extremely acidic. This tree is imperiled right now. It requires very cool conditions, and that alone, if things get warmer, makes it hard on eastern hemlocks. Combined with some invasive insects brought as part of ornamental horticulture, accidentally brought, hemlock woolly adelgid and an elongate hemlock scale, that hemlocks are declining. This is a nature park. Using insecticide to protect a tree that doesn't have a long life ahead of it is an inappropriate idea. We can enjoy it right now. This is what they look like after a few years of infestation by hemlock woolly adelgid, getting sparse. It takes about 5 to 7 years for hemlock woolly adelgid to kill a hemlock tree. We have one other tree. As we introduce the trees, the tour for trees is going to speed up, but this is a wonderful, wonderful tree that everyone should grow. And the only reason you should grow it is that it's a wonderful tree. It doesn't have showy blooms. Its fruits are kind of interesting, but not spectacular. It has shaggy bark looking sort of like a red elm. Okay, this is called a hop hornbeam or American ironwood. Okay, the wood is incredibly strong. These trees rarely achieve massive diameter, and so they're not lumbered. I've seen a 20-inch one, was the 20-inch diameter, biggest one I've seen. This plant often grows in base-rich sites that are fairly well drained. And so you'll see it on shoulder slopes and mid slopes and base-rich sites, and occasionally in ravines. This one is planted. Were this site the way it was before this site was altered, these would have been abundant on the edges of Glen Osborne and on the slopes in the Glenshaw Formation. They become less common in the next rock series up, the Castleman Formation. But once you're on top of the Castleman, they'd be common again. I'm going to point one out here because it's so close. Many years ago, a former person involved with this park, his name is Thad, he and I were enjoying a Sewickley garden tour in 1996 when I had my first garden on display in the Sewickley garden tour. We were talking about the lovely population of this plant in this site. In 1996, this park is not what it is now. Osborne Trail Association wasn't there. This is called bloodroot. It's, I'll say it's in the poppy family. That most botanists agree that to be true. It has beautiful, very, very early blooms in the spring. It provides pollen resources for winged insects in earliest April. So leaves aren't out yet, and there's little, they almost look like daisies. They're white and yellow, beautiful flowers there. Those are its leaves. There would be a lot of them. Okay, we're gonna hang a right here. Red elm, white elm. A fun thing about elm trees, and here we have an American white elm, and there's an American red elm right there. When they grow in wet soils, saturated soils, places with a high water table, they have a basal hypertrophy. Okay, the roots grow into these amazing buttresses, and so they look like a tree in the rainforest. It's kind of fun. We have these two Sentinel American sycamores that are, I think that is the largest diameter tree in the park, this one. It is gorgeous. These trees, in the knot holes of their branches, provide abundant habitation for wildlife. Our exotic invasive honeybee loves to nest in sycamore cavities, but so do flying squirrels and the prothonotary warbler I was talking about, and almost any other cavity nester. These trees will create natural cavities. A branch dies, and the branch collar around it grows out, and eventually that branch dies and it decays back to a point called a branch protection zone typically, and that decay doesn't spread inward or downward further in the trunk, but it creates a very small cavity in a tree. That's home for some critters. And we should turn the camera around to enjoy the fact that we can walk past and through these two sentinels. If anyone wants to see a bright orange and yellow male bird called a Baltimore Oriole, it was a northern oriole, it's back to Baltimore now. Baltimore Orioles love to build their hanging sock nests in pendulous branches on American sycamores. So this is a great nest tree for the bird. The birds often are eating insects on the adjacent oaks and cherries and apples and what have you, but with high frequency nest in American sycamore branches. And if we're listening carefully, a few days ago there were probably 15 Baltimore Orioles calling from the tops of all of these trees. It was quite a cacophony of whistle. Right? Can anyone remind me the name of our run right here? There's a stream that it is Park? Is that it? Park Run? Yep. All right. So here it is, Park Run. It is a slightly impacted stream. It is not known for huge amounts of diversity of aquatic life, but it gives us running water and is a tremendous asset to this park and the area. The large and fine woody debris in this park creates structural diversity and does create habitat for things. If some of the upstream potential sources for unwanted chemistry weren't there, there might be a little more life in the stream bed. But this is what it is to have a stream in a built area. Right behind us, it's just out of bloom, I can't show it off. This is an Appalachian plant mostly known from the drainage of the New River and Kanawha River, right? This is called Carolina Silverbill. It was spectacular a couple weeks ago in bloom. It is out of its natural range right here, planted ornamentally. There is a prodigious population from the edge of the Sewickley Cemetery going all the way down the hill into Sewickley. That is adventive but totally functional. It's a food plant for a large number of organisms. A number of large charismatic moths, Saturnid moths, the giant silk moths, feed on these. Bumblebees love their flowers, and it's white flowers, absolutely gorgeous. If anyone doesn't know, the New River is considered one of the oldest rivers in the world. If you've ever seen the New River Gorge in West Virginia, it's spectacular with the big bridge. That bridge is, the river is considered older than the Appalachian Mountains that it carved through, right? That mountains didn't change the course of the river, which meant the river was there first, and the mountains grew up around it. And they have since weathered down to, max 6,000 some foot tall. So it's a very ancient river, and this is a plant that is mostly found around that very ancient drainage. So here's a plant from the tertiary, again going north and colonizing in western Pennsylvania. It is adventive, it's just out of its range, but it is found in the same ecoregion south of here. So, the New River, yep, it turns into the Kanawha River, and it used to be called the Tees River, T-E-A-Y-S, Tees River, and that river, before the last glaciation, was considered to flow north through central Ohio and dump out into what would be the Lawrence Seaway, right? That
it's one of the few north-flowing rivers in the United States.
Yes, sir. Right. And so, north-flowing rivers. Why don't rivers flow north?
Because of glaciers.
You got it. Because of an ice dam. They hit, Game of Thrones people out there. They hit the giant ice wall, and then they turn. Right. So there were warm periods when there was not huge mountains of ice in places that froze the water, and the water could not move, and so the water that was not frozen, right, builds up into a lake, and it has to go somewhere, and so it follows the edge of the ice back to wherever it's not, and then, in our case it's the polar north, so it's going back south. When this landmass was mostly tropical a long time ago, right? And we were probably around the equator, and the Earth was a lot warmer. Who knows? When they thought the Earth was a lot warmer, we didn't have plate tectonic theory, so we're still working that one out. The rivers could flow north, and rivers flow downhill, right? But if there's a 2 mile high ice mountain 45 miles north of here, the north-flowing Ohio River at that point, the north-flowing Monongahela at that point, the north-flowing Youghiogheny, right, went right up to here around Beaver Falls, and would have kept flowing north in the Beaver River, right? It's a big river valley for a little tiny river. That river, the Beaver River, we suspect changed flow. It used to flow north, now it flows south. That's visible in the river gorge rocks. You can see the scour pattern on the rock face. And so a little bit of geologic understanding, it's immediately apparent. That's 6-8 miles downriver from here. The Ohio River makes a tremendous U-bend. Right there, it's a center of plant diversity because once upon a time, that huge ravine, that huge valley was a glacial lake because of the river being dammed. These were north-flowing rivers carrying propagules of plants from the south that got stuck there, and it had reduced flow because it was a lake, and so these southern plants are deposited all around the edges of the lake. So if you're ever right around there, there's tremendous floral diversity, right? North-flowing rivers are carrying things from the south. That gives range expansion. It's a conductor of plants and animals. So that's how we got our pipe vines from here up to Aliquippa, right? The seeds floated up, the vine washed up and got caught and managed to live. And so we have the northwesternmost populations of these plants. So it's kind of neat. Ancient rivers. Okay, so we have a lot of exotic invasive plants that don't contribute a whole lot to wildlife in the park. Okay, and we have 2 species of viburnum in this park. We just walked past the one. A lot of you may have it in your gardens, and that's how it got here. It's Viburnum Placatum. Okay, is over there. It's got white flowers, and then this one is small, but the leaves look like a placatum. The other one is Viburnum sieboldii. These are 2 East Asian plants that do well in a very similar rainfall pattern. Here they don't do anything for caterpillars. They do a little bit for some generalist bees. We have specialist bees, specialist caterpillars that really like our indigenous viburnums. But this one is not one. Its leaves are mostly in perfect shape because nothing eats them. They fix carbon, they transpire, they cool our air a little bit, but ecologically they're a plastic plant. Maybe in 10,000 years things will specialize onto them, or we'll accidentally introduce more of their things that feed on them. Right next to it, similar scenario, this tree is called a white mulberry. This tree was brought by some well-meaning people hoping to start a silk industry in the area. Old economy down the river, the Economites, Harmony, what's another town named after them? A group of people, very industrious, had strange ideas about reproduction. They're not around anymore. They brought a large diversity of white mulberries, hoping to start a silk industry in Pennsylvania. It didn't go well. The very tropical Bombax mori silk moth does not do well in our climate. It's a little too cold in the winter, so now you got to bring it inside and burn heat, and then you need leaves. And reminder, there aren't leaves in the winter here, so it's not the best spot for a silk industry. Anyway, so they brought in these mulberries, white mulberries. The fruit on most white mulberries is not white. Some white mulberries have white fruit. They brought us these trees. We had a red mulberry, okay? The red mulberry is all but gone from this area. Everyone calls this plant a red mulberry because it has red fruits. No one seems to have realized that a tree that was not of major economic importance is gone, right? And there was a specialized bit of life that depend on mulberries. And south of here, and to the Midwest, there are still abundant red mulberries. But right around here, the epicenter of the white mulberry invasion, the mulberries have disappeared. So these two plants can cross and make progeny that is hybrid, but it's not hybrid in the sense of a liger that it can't have babies, okay? Plants are pretty easy going. In part, the red mulberry is being outbred by the white mulberry, which likes disturbed sites. It loves limestone, but it likes disturbed sites. And so as we expand the human footprint in the area with major infrastructure, we're building habitat for a bird dispersed mulberry, which is able to genetically swamp the other mulberries and thus reduce that gene frequency, the appearance of the plant, generations down. That's compounded by the fact that we brought in a handful of undercharacterized diseases that are vascular diseases and have just killed the remnant red mulberries. So we look at this, it's kind of picturesque. We have a eroding slope, which is an amazing habitat. There are bees that only nest in the eroding slopes adjacent to streams, one of which is called a cellophane bee. It's kind of neat. It's a subterranean solitary bee. Mrs. Bee, Ms., she's single, excavates a nest. She lines the nest with a protein that is watertight. So they're called cellophane bees because the nest lining looks like cellophane. If it washes out, you'll see these little, it looks like sausage casing. Sometimes it'll wash up as stream debris. It's a protein, it's not plastic. They nest in there. They're pretty neat, cellophane bees. They're incredible, oftentimes allegolectic bees. They are specialist bees. They only feed on the pollen and nectar of certain plants. Their babies can only survive on that. This eroding slope, everyone that lived through the 70s remembers how bad erosion is. And there's agricultural erosion, right? And there's natural stream bed erosion. There's two different erosions, right? This is habitat, the other is land abuse. Okay, so not all erosion's bad. It's a nuanced discussion. But we have this erosive slope, which would be habitat for this, that, and the other plant, and it is habitat for some plants. In this space, we have one American ash. I can't tell you which ash tree it is. Might be a green. It's hard to tell. That one has been defoliated by deer by the looks of it. We have a viburnum that is one of the Asian viburnums. We have a mulberry that is one of the Asian mulberries, right? The park is kind of invaded, but the park's wonderful. And we have this one. This is called Bittersweet. We have Bittersweet because it's in fruit, a beautiful ornamental plant, makes excellent fall arrangements, has these red fruits, and it has the kind of yellow accessory structures, very attractive. We have an American bittersweet that is almost gone, very similar disappearance syndrome to the mulberry. The American bittersweet almost gone. American red mulberry almost gone in this area. We have the East Asian or Central Asian bittersweet that has largely replaced it. So there's a lot of life challenges in this park, but this disturbed habitat, right, an erosive slope, has a community of plants that, in this case, a novel community for the area growing on it. And this could just as easily be a red mulberry if there wasn't a bacterial disease knocking them out. This could easily be Viburnum lentago or Viburnum prunifolium, the nanny berry lentago, or black haw, two indigenous viburnums, would grow in the same site. You know, here are the relatives doing the same thing because the propagules of those plants I just mentioned in this area are less common, so they don't have a chance. So keep marching, walking. The sound of this stream is incredible. How can you beat that? We have another hackberry. This park is really neat for another thing, and I can't explain this phenomenon. We have numerous double trunk trees. Something happened to the tree to make it double trunked when it was a little seedling, and many of them, trees twist often as they grow. And we have many double trunk trees that have twisted and they are naturally grafting, inosculating to one another. They're really showy. We have our, look at this spectacular area for use. We have picnic tables, we have a fire pit. You can come and have a fire. You have to extinguish it. What are the rules for the fire?
Put it out.
Put it out, exactly. It's good if you're going to light a fire to let the Osborne Park and Trail Association know you're going to be burning in here. Let Mrs. Mayor know. It's there. It's a beautiful space. There aren't so many parks that you can have an open type fire in the area, right? Is there a fire pit available in Walker Park? I don't know. There's some barbecues, but yeah. So that's an amazing thing. We have 2 blooming size alternate leaf dogwoods in the park. The other one's over there. You can just make out the flowers. You can see a large stump. We lost some trees. There was some oak wilt, a vascular disease of oak trees. As we get closer to 65, there's some power lines there. For some reason, the oak tree was damaged. It attracted a beetle that feeds on the sap. The beetles had spores on it of this fungus. The fungus, which is considered an exotic invasive fungus that our trees are not resistant to, gets into the vasculature of the plant, blocks the vasculature up, and so now it's got a vascular obstructive disorder. Some oak trees do it to themselves as part of their defense response. Other oak trees, the fungus just plugs them up. It depends on the species. The result is, in 1 to 2 years post-inoculation, a very large charismatic tree is lost. A reminder, oak trees host more lepidopterans, moths and butterflies, the caterpillars, than any other tree in the East. The American chestnut, which is now a non-functional part of our landscapes because of an introduced disease, may have hosted more, but no one's doing research on that because there aren't enough trees to research. So we lost some oak trees, but stumps are charismatic too. Reminder, stumps host a lot of life. There are beetles that only eat the wood of stumps or only eat the decayed wood of stumps. The larvae of these beetles can take 20 years to mature into a reproductive adult flying beetle, right? And so if there's not large format dead wood in places, you can't have a huge group of beetles. Coarse woody debris in this area supports 20 to 25% of our biodiversity. It's a keystone. You get rid of coarse woody debris, you just lost 20 to 25% biodiversity like that. Gone. So we treat woody debris on a developed landscape as an eyesore. We treat it as a liability. That is contributing to the loss of a large number of organisms. In a setting like this, a park, aesthetically, a stump doesn't look out of place, a downed log doesn't look out of place. That's a choice though, that's aesthetics. That's how we're apportioning, you can be here, right? If we understand the value of coarse woody debris, we could arrange it artistically. We can make statuary out of it. You can carve it into a bald eagle if you want. But it still houses life, right? And that life is not there if you get rid of it. So ahead of us, there's something mysterious up there. Can you see? It's blocked off by evergreens. Okay, this is the deepest part of the park. And ahead of us is what we call the stumpery, okay? And it has a lot of ferns, and we're doing a lot of work in there to rematriate plants, and it's worth a look. This is our only eastern witch hazel in the park. It recently had a piece of a London plane tree, which is a garden hybrid of a sycamore and an East Asian sycamore. That's a London plane tree. These are all sycamores. This large piece of wood fell. The tree's okay. There was what appeared to be a screech owl nest in that large piece of wood. No owls were seen, but there were a large amount of skeletons of snakes and mice and other things piled up in there. That's what screech owl nests look like. So, okay, so now we get closer to the stumpery, past the fire pit. It's either very quiet here or it's very loud. It's very loud because we're next to a state highway and a train track. We are in development of making this area a spectacular hidden part of the park. We have planted, transplanted very recently, they're not dead, they're dormant, sycamores that we dug from another part of the park. We are going to train them and tie them together so they graft into an archway over the trail. It's going to take a couple of years. But again, they're going through a little bit of transplant shock, so they haven't broken bud yet. They have just a couple little sprouts here and there. I want to point out one flower. Yes, sir, the mayapple. Beautiful plant. Spring ephemeral. By July, they're mostly gone. Umbrella leaves. Lovely white flowers. Bumblebees, queen bumblebees, the matriarch of their nest, go to these flowers. And were there lots of box turtles? Box turtles eat the fruit of the mayapple. The mayapple fruit is about the size of a hen's egg and has a gelatinous pulp on the inside that tastes a lot like passion fruit. And one of the major seed dispersers are box turtles. On this little floral stalk right here, you would get this apple, small apple, crab apple. It's shaped like a hen's egg. Green when it's ripe, it's yellow. It's very much like a passion fruit if you've had a passion fruit. Mayapples, I'm talking about things you can eat. Mayapples have some chemistry in them you do not want to eat. So you can eat the pulp, but don't chew those seeds because that could be problematic. And if you've ever tried to eat a mayapple fruit, it's hard for us to not chew the seeds. So please be extremely careful. This is our stumpery. It's an area in development. We are enriching it with indigenous herbaceous plants. It's very shady. Right here we have Aralia racemosa, American spikenard. That's another root beer plant from back in the day. A couple other things. Sadly, this part of our park is subject to large amounts of vandalism. People move things a lot. We have had this beautifully planted multiple times and the plants walk off. But it's coming back. We have a lot of trees planted in here. I'll point out this one. This is a plant that's especially relevant around here. That's called a Crested Iris. It's an indigenous woodland iris. There used to be an extremely large population of them along Thorn Run Road that was eliminated related to the road widening project. This area is some of the northernmost for this plant, at least northwesternmost, and there's some disjuncts in the range, but this is a plant that used to be known from McKees Rocks and Coriopolis and whatever. This plant is descended from a plant which we believe was taken from the wild across the river, which I begged from someone's garden around here. So anyway, we have some art. We're trying to beautify it. These stumps, as they break down, are all going to be planted. It's pretty neat. We have a couple white pines. This broad expanse of green is a plant called, one of them with the cut leaves is a problematic plant in wild areas. It's the impatient bittercress. A lot of people have hairy bittercress in their gardens. This is another exotic bittercress. It takes over riparian sites. It is associated with a decline in the indigenous herbaceous flora. It outcompetes them, and it may have chemistry that gets in the way of some of their lives. But to control these things, because there's too many to pull, our maintenance guy is going to use a string trimmer to just cut off the seed heads and try to preserve the adjacent desirable plants. Active area of development.